Hey readers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire Books, and I'm here with a special video to me because I'm going to be trying to narrow down my top 5 books of 2020. I'm just going to say outright, I kind of stink at these lists because my tastes are very mercurial. I just change all the time. What I really, really love will stay fairly consistent, but what I think is my favorite will change. That said, I really do have a pretty set number 1 this year, which you'll have to wait to hear about. But let's start with a couple of honorable mentions and get down to business. So my first honorable mention is actually Julian by Gore Vidal. I reviewed that book earlier in the year on this channel, and I just love that book. I didn't count it in this list because I didn't read it in 2020. I'd read it before, and Julian is a reread. That said, if you have any interest in historical fiction, and especially in historical fiction about Rome, Julian is amazing. It is a book that is just this really interesting and sensitive treatment of the life of Julian the Apostate, who was the last pagan emperor of Rome, and a would-be philosopher who died too soon. And the book is some of his older teachers and philosopher friends reflecting on the life that he led and their situation in an increasingly Christianized Roman Empire. So now for a couple of actually read in 2020 honorable mentions. So the first one would be The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. And this book is about a French girl who is desperate not to get married. She wants much more than this provincial life. And so she makes a deal with the devil that she will live forever, but the consequence is that she will be forgotten by everybody she meets. In the case of the book, within minutes, like out of sight, out of mind, literally, which leads to some super interesting complications. And the idea is that the only way that she can end her life is to decide that she no longer thinks it's worth living and allow the devil to take her soul. And while this book is very much a hipster-filled indie film, but like in the form of a book, I really enjoyed it. And I think what made it mean so much to me and made me give it 5 stars is that it reflects the kind of hunger that I have in my own life right now. I'm in my 30s, I'm still young, but I just feel like there's not enough time to do all the things that I want to do, experience all the things that I want to experience. And so I really can understand Addie LaRue's hunger for her life and the experiences that she craves and continues to crave 300 years on. Because I think if I were in her situation, I might feel the same way. What I'm curious about, however, is will I feel the same way about this book in a year? It's one of those ones where I feel like it was really good in the moment and I really liked it and I'm still thinking about it, but I'm also not sure if I'm going to think that it's great literature in a year to 2 years from now. So I'll be really curious to see if my relationship with and feelings about this book evolve. My other honorable mention is Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. So Hamnet is a piece of historical fiction that is about basically Shakespeare and his wife losing their son. And we don't actually know a lot about the real history behind all of this, but Maggie O'Farrell fills in the blanks, and she focuses mostly on Shakespeare's wife, and she has their son die of the plague. And she makes Anne Hathaway, who's Agnes in this book, into a really interesting character. There were aspects of her characterization that I did not like, which is why this book is an honorable mention. And mainly what I didn't like is that she's presented as this kind of witchy woman with these unusual abilities, and she's got healing powers, and she can kind of see the future or like see into the soul of a person. And I'm not really sure that that level of making her magical was necessary to the book. It was kind of like practical magic meets Wolf Hall, but I really wanted just the Wolf Hall part, if that makes sense. I mean, I like witchy literature, but in this case, I thought making Agnes a little Mary Sue-ish was just kind of a strange choice, because where the book really takes off is in the little familial relationships that everyone is having to each other throughout the book. So Agnes's relationship with her stepmother, very troubled. Her relationship with her brother, very charming and supportive. You know, there are all kinds of issues within William Shakespeare's family that then, of course, Agnes marries into and has to deal with. And the way that the children understand each other and the adults around them is very well done, very interesting. And, you know, Maggie O'Farrell has this really lush writing style that helps, I think, really capture the environment that her characters are in, especially when they're outside in nature. Some of her descriptions of bees and, you know, the woods are so gorgeous. And then as the book builds up to where Hamnet actually dies, so you know he's going to die at the beginning of the book. It's not a spoiler. But when we finally get to where that's happening and the aftermath of his life and the grief that his parents feel comes to the forefront, that is where the book really shines. So I was a little bit about it at the beginning. By the end of this book, I was crying my eyes out over how much Hamnet's parents loved and missed him and how they expressed it. And it was just really something. The book should absolutely be read. I did give it 5 stars. It's just that I thought that some of the choices for how to characterize Agnes were distracting and weird. The book still just really soars once you get into it. And man, that book was, that put me through the emotional ringer. Wow. So now let's get into our full-on top 5. Starting with number 5. Number 5 would be The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. The 3rd volume in this series just came out. I have downloaded all 3. I'm about halfway through volume 2. And man, this is so good. But The Poppy War itself is an excellent piece of fantasy. And it's what I'm hoping for when I read fantasy books. You know, first of all, frankly, as a huge nerd who's obsessed with school, I went to University of Chicago where fun comes to die. Reading about the difficult test that Ren, the main character, has to study for and take, and then about the elite school that she goes to, I mean, that's my fantasy right there. Just having to study really hard forever in a brutal environment. Let's go. So the book immediately hooked me, but that's not where the book stays. And I was just really pleased with the fascinating magic system in the book, with some of the moral challenges that Ren starts to face, especially as she has a teacher who is leading her in one way, and then kind of the world and her situation leading her in another. And this book is very much based on Asian history, so you know you can see a lot of the conflict between China and Japan and some of the atrocities that those nations committed against each other reflected in the book. And there's so many ideas in there about colonialism and about who owns land and how people should value and honor their heritage, especially in situations where genocide has wiped out the family and the heritage they could have known. This book deals with so many heavy issues, but while still in this really fun, like, whoa, this is exciting fantasy setting. And I'm just amazed that R.F. Kuang managed to do that, and I'm here for it. I'm along for the rest of this ride. I'm pretty sure that this is gonna be a gut-wrenching finale to the series, I can already tell, but that's what really good fantasy should be, I think. My number 4 novel that I read this year was Transcendent Kingdom by Gyasi. Man, that was a good book. I was really fascinated by this one. So Transcendent Kingdom is basically about a girl who has immigrated from Africa to the United States. She's grown up in the South. She has an identity both as an immigrant and as a Southern Christian, which her mother very much embraces, and her family has suffered from a tragic loss because her brother, while he was originally a star athlete, became addicted to painkillers, and he eventually overdoses and dies. So when you get to the beginning of the book, our main character is now getting her doctorate at Stanford, and she's studying addiction in mice. While she's doing that, her mom has a mental breakdown that mirrors the breakdown she had when her brother initially died. And so it's about family healing and a mother and a daughter trying to relate to each other. The daughter trying so hard to find her own path in terms of what she believes and how she explains her brother's death to herself. And Gyasi's just her observations about human nature, and I think especially about American Christianity and some of its issues with racism and with, you know, the conflicts between fundamentalism and science it's just so well done. Her writing is beautiful. There were so many insights in the book that I just kind of treasured for later, and I really just have a strong memory of my experience of reading that book. So I loved Transcendent Kingdom. And I think if you want an interesting literary experience, a tour through somebody else's mind, something that's really beautifully written and also difficult, that Transcendent Kingdom is a wonderful choice. So my number 3 this year was not published in 2020. It's an older book. I really loved Augustus by John Williams. So this is a piece of historical fiction. It's basically an epistolary novel that documents the viewpoints of several people who were around during the rise of Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. If you're into Roman history at all, you know that Augustus was both a pivotal figure in Roman history and somebody who's really very interesting. He lived an interesting life. He had a fascinating and messed up family. And so basically there's no shortage of entertainment there. But the way that John Williams handles it is so good. He just seems so sensitive to not only the tone that somebody from that time must have taken when they were writing and the concerns they would have had, but also he does a really good job of connecting emotionally with the characters instead of just kind of leaning into the drama about the ancient world. He has all these fully realized people populating this world, and you know, as somebody who's read all the history, but is still interested in deeper characterizations and kind of analysis of the human element of this, that really appealed to me. I particularly loved his depictions of Julia. She's Augustus's daughter. She is basically convicted of adultery. She commits a lot of sexual crimes. She was known as being very promiscuous. But he has a lot of stuff written from her point of view on the island where she is exiled, and her understanding of her own life and her bodily autonomy and her freedom really touched me. And I thought it was just a really wonderful realization of her character. So overall, I love a great piece of historical fiction about Rome, and this one really, really did it for me. My number 2 book of this year is a book that I waited a long time for. Sometimes I feel like all I do is just wait for the 3rd book in trilogies to come out. I'm just saying. But for me, my number 2 book of this year was The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel. So The Mirror and the Light is the 3rd book in Mantel's series about Thomas Cromwell, which started with Wolf Hall. Man, when did Wolf Hall come out? It was like 2012? Was it 2010? And then Bring Up the Bodies came out in 2012? Anyway, I've been waiting a really long time for this book. And I was so upset and so heartbroken when it ended, because this trilogy's meant a lot to me. I would say that this Cromwell trilogy is some of the best historical fiction I have ever read in my life. I did not know that I cared about Cromwell until I read Hilary Mantel's version of Cromwell. Her writing is just so gorgeous. It's so intelligent. And the first 2 books in the trilogy were stunning. And the 3rd, while it's a little bit different, it's a little bit more chatty, a little bit less active. It makes perfect sense for Thomas Cromwell at this point in his life. And she's still bringing back this character that I really loved and realizing him and his world in such a beautiful way. And I just, man, spoiler alert, haha, Thomas Cromwell gets executed. So obviously the book is going to end with the end of his life. And I was bawling as I read the last several pages, as I know that he's going to die, because I did not want him to. I really did not want Thomas Cromwell to die, because I had become so attached to him and to his world and to these books. And they also just mean something a little bit extra to me, because, so I love my family very much. I love my grandfather very much, but he and I can't talk about a lot of stuff. We disagree so intensely about religion and politics that it's hard to find safe topics of conversation. But Pops loves the Hilary Mantel books, and so do I. So this is also something where I was able to send him this book on the day it came out, download it myself, and we both were able to read it and then talk about it. And so, you know, I have an extra attachment to this trilogy as something that let me have more of a relationship with a member of my family that I don't always get to have. So in addition to just loving the books as they are, they also mean something more to me. And I'm really sad that there aren't going to be any more, because now what am I going to talk to my grandfather about? I guess I'll have to find a different book, but what could be as good as these? They're amazing. So if you want to read possibly the best historical fiction ever, I think read the Cromwell trilogy by Hilary Mantel, because holy crap, it was good. But it still wasn't my very best book of 2020. And that's saying a lot, actually. But my very best book of 2020, definitely a book that I just still really remember vividly, would recommend to anyone. It's the book on this list that I think every person should buy and read. That would be The Vanishing Half by Bennett. The Vanishing Half is stunning. It is an amazing book, and it is about these identical twin sisters who basically live in a town full of light-skinned black people called Mallard. So they are black, but they live in a culture that very, very much prizes being light-skinned, and it is possible in several situations that they could pass for white. So the sisters end up being estranged for years and years and years. They don't know what happened to each other because one sister chooses to marry a very dark-skinned black man, and she has a daughter. The other sister chooses to pass as white. She marries a white man, and she also has a daughter, but she has to really reject her background and hide the details of her life because she's passing. She can't get caught, or else the consequences would be unimaginable. So the book starts with the sisters and then moves on to their daughters and their lives. And it's just this incredible meditation on identity and family, what you give up to have some things, whether it's worth it, and, what the next generation does after, one generation has its own troubles and its own challenges. And I thought that this book was incredible. I was enthralled from page 1 all the way to the end. I feel like this is the sort of book that I wish that I had had access to in my English classes when I was younger, because it's one of those books that's extremely readable and something that you can really think about. It's meaty, but it doesn't feel that way as you're reading it. And I really love that in a book. The writing is just gorgeous. The thoughts and observations that Bennett makes throughout the book are both understated and very poignant. There are other explorations of identity in the next generation. For example, Jude, who is one of the twins' daughters, falls in love with a man named Reese, who is trans. And their relationship and how it develops is really lovely. And I felt well done. Basically, this is a book that is a quick, just fascinating read. I had to know what happened next, but it also just keeps giving and giving and giving after you finish it. So if you buy one book that was published in 2020, I actually think it should be the Vanishing half. It was great. But the books on this list, I think, were pretty awesome. I hope that you enjoyed hearing what I had to say. And if you have some top books of 2020, I would be delighted to see them in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and happy reading.